Hello. Hey guys, don't worry, we're not starting yet, but this is just your 3-minute warning. So yeah, we'll start in 3 minutes.
I'm really intrigued by the nose.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that.
We're having a slight technical issue with the search video, and so we may or may not be able to show it.
That's fine. We've shown it
So
loads of
what-
times.
So what happens is
There is also another video if that would help.
Bex on the sound.
I don't know if my mic's working.
Hello. Hello.
On?
Good
Hello?
evening.
Okay, awesome. Hey everyone. Welcome to Known Day 4. Can't believe it's day 4 already. It's gone so quickly. But it's so nice to have you all with us, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us on the live stream. I'm Grace, one of your hosts. I'm a second year studying law at Exeter College.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. Somehow you lot have dealt with 4 days of me hosting, but I'm a second year historian at Magdalen. Thanks for coming.
Awesome. So, Jonathan, you gave us a question about the gnome yesterday.
So yeah, this is the known gnome. Say hello if you haven't met him, or her. We haven't had a name for the known gnome all week, and so we decided that it would be wrong for the week to end and for the known gnome to not have a name. I've heard the name John T being bandied about. I've heard some other names being bandied about. I've heard Jerome the gnome. If anyone else has any suggestions, this is your chance to shout out. Be loud enough so that people online can hear you. No. Like Noel Gallagher. Noel Gallagher the gnome. Any other suggestions? Noah the gnome.
It's a bit basic, but Nomeo?
Romeo and Juliet.
That's the one.
Okay. Not a fan of that personally. But if you do have any other suggestions for the known gnome, come find me afterwards and we'll have a chat about it.
Lovely. We love some random banter. Awesome.
Well, tonight is going to be great. We're hearing from John T again, and we also have a special guest, Esther Jane. I'll get my words out. And we're going to welcome her up right now.
Whoop, whoop.
While she gets her mic, may I remind you once again, please keep your mask on, and at the end, the stewards will direct you out. Esther Jane.
Good evening.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to be back in Oxford.
Indeed. When were you here?
I was actually here for 6 years, from 2013 through 2019. The mic is plugged in.
No. Well, I'll repeat what she said. She was here from 2013 to 2019. What college were you at?
I was at the infamous Regent's Park College. A PPH is...
A lot of Regent's Park fans out there tonight.
It's small. But
It's probably the whole college.
yeah, pretty much.
As we were walking through, Esther Jane was like, oh, I remember being there, and I remember this, and I remember this. And then there was the realization that, do we say this is the final year where there'll be students here who were here at the same time as you?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I don't recognize anyone, which is sad.
Next time. On Monday, Monty was here, and we've been discussing since what it would be like to have an 8-hour car journey, how you would entertain yourself. Monty had his wife as DJ and listened to Taylor Swift, but the only song he could remember was Shake It Off. Now, we've learned that John T is quite the singer, but if you were going to have music on during an 8-hour car ride, what do you think you'd be listening to?
What would I do? I think I'd probably solo perform Les Mis from start to finish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How
It's
many
actually
times-
something I can do.
How many times would you have to perform it to fill 8 hours?
I reckon 2.5 times. It's quite long, 3 hours.
With no interval?
Yeah, we'd maybe take a loo break, but...
Whilst in the car?
Well, no. I feel like I'm being stitched up here.
Sorry, I didn't prep her on that question. Okay, Les Mis. I must admit, I've never watched it. So, anyway, let's get on with the interview. Tell me, what do you do now? What do you do currently?
So I've moved to the other place, and I currently work at a church called Holy Trinity in Cambridge as the worship pastor there. So that basically means I do music full-time in a church. Well,
Just a little footnote. She works in the other place, but her heart is still here.
You could say that.
Exactly. Tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up? What was it like?
Yeah, so I grew up actually not too far from Oxford in a place called Marlow in Buckinghamshire. Had a great family, really fortunate with that, and grew up in a Christian home, but despite a great upbringing, I guess, I really struggled with anxiety from a young age, particularly surrounding like fear of health and fear of death. As a young child, my grandfather was in hospital pretty much my entire life, and I witnessed a lot of people dying around him, but he seemed to carry on going, and we joked he was the man with 9 lives. But from a young age, I had a real awareness of death, and then when I was 11, a friend who was born just a couple weeks before me was at school one day, didn't feel very well, went home, and the following morning he actually died from meningitis. And that for me was just really shook me to think how fragile life was. And actually, you know, I'd seen older people die in hospital, but then someone of the same age as me dying, and that really just sparked many years of crippling anxiety and panic attacks, and just grappling with how on earth can we like believe in a God that I've been grown up to believe in, and yet we still have suffering and we see people die prematurely. And how do I grapple with anxiety personally, particularly with fear of death? So I think that was a pretty big marker in my childhood. But around the age of about 14, I remember having a conversation with my brother, and he asked me, he said, "Esther Jane, I want you to imagine the best place you could possibly ever imagine." And he said to me, "I want you to describe this to me, go into detail." And he just said, "You know, I really believe that heaven is even better than anything you've imagined, and I believe that when we die, we can enter into this place, and so I don't fear death, and I don't think you need to fear death either." And that for me was a real turning point, and as I started to come face to face with death, and the fact that I didn't need to fear death.
And so you have this chat with your brother. Does that help you for your later teens? Did that kind of change you back?
Yeah, so on the back of that, I guess I'd had a faith that had been very much caught up with my family, but after that conversation, I really started to just personally accept a living faith in my own life, and I saw the ways in which I was, for many years, I found myself free from anxiety, particularly fear of death and fear of like health. And so I guess when I was about 15, I really stepped in and made the decision that I personally wanted to be a Christian.
So when you then came to university, you studied theology at Regent's. How did you find that? How did your faith kind of go in that period?
Yeah, I think when you come to Oxford and you study theology, you have to really separate out, I guess, a lot of what we intellectually think of faith and how that actually applies to our life. I had a really interesting experience of university. In my second year, when I was at Oxford, I ended up losing my dad very suddenly, and I got a call, and the call said Dad had a heart attack at work today and he died. And that was in 6th week of Hillary in my second year, and that just changed my world. That just flipped everything upside down, and I still remember the night really vividly. And the reason I say that is I was actually at St. Aldate's just down the road, and I was singing that night, and I was playing the piano, and I had my phone on the keyboard, and I had a call from my mum, which, you know, any person would think, it's your mum calling you, no big deal. I can't explain it, I just knew in that moment. We were singing a song at that point that said, "My faithful Father, you've carried me I will not fear, you will not fail, you'll never let me go. And just in that moment, the phone rang, and I wouldn't say it was an audible voice, but I felt this really strong sense of, I would say, the presence of God saying to me, your world is about to get turned upside down, but I need you to know I'm going to be a faithful father to you, and you don't need to fear. And I stepped off the stage, and I picked up the phone, I called my mum back, and that was when I heard the news. And that was life-changing, and it has been life-changing. I was 20 years old, and you just don't ever expect that sort of call at that age. So I think that really marked my experience of Oxford. I'd say my experience of Oxford in the first half, and the second half was really different. I know this lunchtime, if anyone was listening or came, that Kaz was talking about suffering, and I think, I'd had a fear of death, and I'd had a fear of losing people, but actually what it was to almost like dive headfirst into that fear was really huge. And I just remember, I think this year for all of us has been a year of having to grapple with those questions of suffering. We probably all know somebody who has lost someone to COVID, or maybe even some of you here have personally lost someone this year, and we've been met with our own like face-to-face like experiences of suffering. But I guess a big thing for me in that time was just realizing, I can't explain it, but I just had a peace that everything was going to be okay, that God was with me, and so that was a big experience.
You talked about the peace you felt. I imagine that it was still a very tough experience. How did you deal with that pain?
I think initially I found it very easy to turn to God. I think in those initial months after my dad's death, I just, I found God so close to me. I can't even really explain what it is, how you can word that sort of peace, because it's a peace despite the storm. I'd then say as I carried on in my years at uni, that I started to really feel very angry towards God, and I just started to question, like, how can I believe in a God that is good, and yet my experience of my pain is so different from that. And so the honest answer is, how did I deal with that, is I really ran away from God. I made the decision. I had my friends who, with the best intention in the world, you come back to uni and this life-changing thing has happened, and my friends just said to me, like, hey, let's just forget about it. Like, let's go out to Bridge, let's go to Park End. And it was just, for a year, that genuinely was what I did. I just, every week, every opportunity I could go out, every opportunity I had to get drunk off my face and just forget about the existence of this huge pain was pretty much how I dealt with it for a year. But actually, I think it got to the point where it was like, the morning after, you just wake up and you're like, okay, maybe last night that numbed the pain a little bit, but today I've got an essay deadline that I've got to hit, and I'm still met with the same feelings of pain. And I guess I had a point at which I realized this just isn't working. This isn't numbing the pain anymore. And I remember, again, I called my brother. It was actually about 3 a.m. My brother lives on the west coast of America, so it was conveniently about 7 p.m. for him. I rang him, and I just remember, or I texted him, and I just remember saying, like, I want to come home now. I think I've run away for long enough, but this isn't working anymore, and I feel so lost. And I just remember him saying to me, it's okay, like, you're never too far gone. You can always come back and receive forgiveness. And so that was in my in my third year, I made that decision. Actually, I'm gonna return, and I'm gonna come with my pain and accept that I don't have all the answers, but I do have someone that's walking with me through this pain.
Yeah, really beautiful, that message of you can never be too far. God still welcomes you back. Would you say it's been easy since then?
It's definitely been a journey, I think. With grief, it's very much a cycle. We step into moments of acceptance. I don't think that's a forgetting things, but I think it's a reorientation. I guess now is like this year in COVID, we find ourselves in the new normal. I don't think we're ever going to enter back into a pre-COVID world, but we find ourselves reoriented. And I guess the last few years have been a reorientation as I find what my new ordinary and my new life is. And I think we often talk about joy and pain as being like the two tracks that a train runs along. And I have to say that my experience of pain has actually increased my ability to experience joy. I feel like the two have become more polarized. And so I'd say the last few years there has been real pain, but there's also just been an amazing joy of like, you know, I really believe that there is a hope, that there is a God who not only like promises us the promise of eternity, a world without pain, without suffering, without death, without tears, but also, you know, that's the end. But right now, Jesus, we think about when Jesus came down to earth, that he stepped into our pain and our suffering with us. And when we're experiencing pain, what do we want? We just want someone to be there with us. And for me, I guess that's been just knowing Jesus has been with me these last few years, even if I've not wanted him to be there or I've run away, but had that closeness of knowing joy in the midst of pain. So, yeah.
That feeling of knowing that Jesus is with you throughout any suffering, you expressed that in a song you released in the recently, didn't you?
Yeah, so I guess part of my job, I write songs and release them, and one song that I wrote is a song called Until You Do, which kind of talks about this, like where we're at now. We talk about the future when all things are new, but we recognize that we're not there yet. And this song is just saying, like, you know, you will make all things new, but until you do, we choose to trust you. And I think even now for us, where we find ourselves today, you know, we hope that we're nearly at the end of this really long and hard season, but we're not there yet, and we just have to trust that we'll be carried through it. So yeah.
And finally then, being known by God, how would you summarize that as, what does that mean to you?
Being known by God, I think it's just, I remember having a conversation with a friend, I think because of loss, I've had a real fear of being alone, and I think that's, obviously this year we've had a lot of time to ourselves and being alone, and I remember a friend saying, like, what's the fear in the loneliness? And I said, you know, just that someone might, like, not understand you, or they might not be with you, and you might not be loved. And they were like, okay, so being known and loved. And I just remember having this moment of thinking, okay, that's true, but actually I'm always going to be known and loved, because I believe that we do have a God who sees us, who sees everything, even the things, you know, we don't want people to see, but despite that, God sees that. He looks at you and he just says, I know it all. There's nothing that you have to hide from me, and I love you. And how releasing that is, you know, in the midst of the isolation, this year, which has just been, it's just been awful. But actually, even in the depths of the isolation and the loneliness, just knowing I'm seen and I'm heard and I'm understood and I'm loved in that. And what a security that there is in that. So, yeah.
It's that amazingness of being loved despite our flaws. And because of that, we don't need to feel the guilt and shame.
Exactly.
Let's give Esther Jade a big round of applause. That was amazing.
Thanks so much, Jonathan.
John T. and Grace, over to you.
Thanks so much, Esther. That was amazing. It's really moving and, yeah, really powerful. Thank you. So, John T.
Hello.
I can see an onion on the table. Sorry. You're our speaker tonight. And yeah, every evening this week, which has been amazing. So I'm just going to get to know you a little bit, ask you a few questions. So first question, we've had a few lockdowns over the past year or so. If you would have known that see what I did there? that wasn't intentional. That the first lockdown was coming, how would you have prepared for it?
I would have bought shares in Zoom. It's just unbelievable. I'd never heard of it. And I don't know what Skype were faffing around at, because they seem to have the market. And anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I'd have bought shares in Zoom.
Yeah, that's smart, yeah.
And maybe a lot of hand sanitizer. I just think it was a lot of money to be made.
I see that. Awesome. And you were a student here in Oxford. You studied Lincoln? No, you studied chemistry at Lincoln College. How has Oxford changed since you were here?
Oh, it's weird. Like, things aren't in the same places. You go down a little street and you go, oh, here's this. What have they done with that? Where have they put that? To get G&D's ice cream, I used to have to walk all the way up to whatever, the little Clarendon Street away, miles away. You have to be really committed. And now there's one right here. Honestly. Lots changed. But actually, it's great to be back. And there's something, isn't there, about being in a place that's familiar, something that makes you feel. Our memories are powerful things. And that sense of where you belong and where you identify and where you are formed. So yeah, I've enjoyed walking around Oxford.
Awesome, it's great to have you with us as well. So how would you like to see Oxford changed in the future? That's my final question.
It didn't used to be pedestrianised, the main street in Oxford. That used to have buses up and down it all the time. Now it's mostly pedestrian, isn't it? Yeah, that's cool. I think one of the things about Oxford is that there are some really beautiful buildings, and particularly some really beautiful church buildings. Here's what I would most love to see. I would love to see Oxford packed, those churches packed with people who see that Jesus really is the greatest news the world has ever known. That's what I'd love to see.
I love that. Thanks, Jonty. So Jonty's going to be speaking to us about Imagine a World Where No One Felt Guilty. So thanks, Jonty. Over to you.
Great. Good evening, guys. It's really nice to see you. Thank you if you've come back. That's very gracious of you and brave. If you're here for the first time, welcome. It's great to see you. Several times this week, I or someone else have talked about Jesus dying on a cross. And we've kind of mentioned it, and we've said it's important. I guess most people would understand that Christians think that Jesus dying on a cross is a big deal. And so we put crosses all over the place. We use crosses on top of churches. And the cross is the symbol of what Christians believe. But tonight what we're going to do is we're going to take a hard look at what actually happened when Jesus died. So we're going to use this. This is eyewitness account. We're going to read what actually happened. And I'm going to suggest tonight that as we do this, I want you to have in your mind an onion. If you've seen the film Shrek, then you'll know that ogres are like onions. Because Shrek, the great philosopher, says that they have layers. All that to say, what I want to do tonight is to try and show you that there are layers. We're going to read about when Jesus died, and we're going to peel back layers. And with every layer we peel back, we're going to see something more of what was really going on. If you only see the first layer, then I think you will be tempted to pity Jesus, if that's all you see. If I can get you to see the second layer, then I think you might move from pitying Jesus to admiring him. But if I can get you to see the third layer, if I can take you into the very heart of the onion, I think you might discover not just that you pity him, not just that you admire him, but that you need him. That's where we're heading. I want to invite you to come with me to the heart of the onion. That is a phrase you've probably never heard before. But let's do this. Let's think. So let's turn to the account in here. And I'd love you to turn to page 48. Well, page 47. This is John chapter 19. John chapter 19. Let's read what happened, okay? I guess, we've probably got ideas about Jesus dying on a cross, that sort of stuff. But what actually happened? Let's check it out. Let me read from the start of chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I'm bringing him out to you to let you know I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify! Crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." Let's just stop there. What do you see? I tell you what I see. I see a brutal, ugly, horrible scene. That we mustn't just read these as words on a page. We must try and think. Imagine what it would be like. When it's said that Pilate had Jesus flogged, that doesn't just mean that he was beaten a little bit. It means that the Romans took him and using their whips, they ripped into his back. There was blood and there was pain. This is a brutal thing that we're seeing. And then as they crush a crown of thorns into his skull, and as blood starts to flow down his face, and he wears this purple robe, mocking him for claiming to be a king. Can you see him? Can you see him? It's tragic. A man who'd done so much good, a man who'd said so many wonderful things, a man who'd healed the sick, a man who'd done kindness, a man who was so full of love. Now look at him. There's a reason that when Mel Gibson made the film, The Passion of the Christ, they gave it an 18 certificate. Because this sort of violence is too much. You have to understand the violence that Jesus experienced. Just flick over if you've still got the book open. Flick over to the bit where it says the crucifixion of Jesus. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull. Remember, he's been flogged. Now he's carrying this heavy wooden cross, staggering. Doesn't look impressive. And then Verse 18, there they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. They crucified him. They drove nails through his hands and his feet. They lifted him up on this cross and left him to die. That's the first layer. I remember when I was doing GCSE RE, we watched a film about Jesus. It was before the days of the Passion for the Christ, and we wouldn't have been allowed to watch it anyway. But we watched a slightly more sanitized version. But we watched an account, a video of the crucifixion. And I was sitting next to a girl called Aisha. She wasn't a Christian. She didn't know anything about this stuff. And as we watched this, I suddenly realized that she was sobbing. She was crying. She was so moved by what they were doing to this man. And did you notice as I read it that John says several times there is no basis for a charge against him? This is a miscarriage of justice. He doesn't even deserve it. If he was a wicked criminal, then maybe we could get our heads around it, but he's not. He's innocent, and he's being brutalized and torn apart and being hung up to die in the most agonizing and painful way you could imagine. That's layer 1. So let me ask you this question. Do you feel any sense of pity as you hear that? Do you see what he went through? We've got to engage with this. But we don't stop there. We need to peel back the onion. Because there's something quite remarkable going on. If all you can see is an innocent victim being brutalized, then you will be led to pity him. But let me show you some other stuff that's going on. Have a look at, now on page 49, the moment when Jesus died, verse 28. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. What a weird phrase. No, it's so that Scripture would be fulfilled. In other words, this act, which seems so brutal and so violent and so harsh, suddenly we discover this is planned. This was a plan. This isn't a random act of violence. This was planned. The Scripture, it's talking about the first part of the Bible, the Old Testament, which spoke about the suffering, someone who would come and would suffer and would be thirsty. And Jesus knows this, and he says, that's me. So he says, I'm thirsty. He knows what he's doing. He's fulfilling a plan. Okay, have a look what goes next. A jar of wine vinegar was there. They soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he'd finished the drink, Jesus says, it is finished. Jesus doesn't die with a whimper and a cry. He dies instead with a shout of victory. It is finished. What is finished? Well, the plan. There was a plan. And with that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So as you peel back the layers, first you see a brutal act against an innocent man, but then you begin to look deeper and you see, now hang on a second. This is a plan that Jesus knows exactly what he is doing. He is completing, he is fulfilling a plan that has been promised beforehand. And he sees the moment as he dies as the moment when he's finished the plan. And he says, it is finished. Jesus went to the cross willingly. It is crystal clear when you read John, and you can take that home and you can check it for yourself, that Jesus knew he was going to die. That Jesus planned that he would die, and that Jesus was in complete control of what was happening, to the point that he gave up his spirit. It was not taken from him. And even then, it's emphasized even more as you go on down. Look from verse 31. Now it's the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath. They asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. In other words, they need these guys to hurry up and die. So if you break the legs, then they can't push up and breathe, so then they'll be dead. So they break the legs of the guy over here, they break the legs of the guy over here, but when they come to Jesus, they find he's already dead. Verse 34, instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may believe. These things happen so that the scripture, here it is again, so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones was broken. And as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced. So here is the second layer. This is the plan. Jesus knows what he's doing. And at that point, you may move from pity, oh, poor Jesus, poor innocent Jesus, suddenly to saying, wow, Jesus. The courage, the strength of Jesus, that he would go through that he would have the conviction that this was the right thing to do. And you might find yourself moving from pity to admiration. No longer is it a tragic scene. Instead, it becomes a heroic scene as Jesus willingly offers himself up to death. But if that is all you see, you don't see enough. Because you need to see something more. So let me take you now to the heart of the onion. Let me take you now to what is really, really going on. And believe me, if you can get hold of this, if you can understand this, if you can see this, it will change your life. It's breathtaking. It's so beautiful. Because actually what is going on in the heart of the onion is an act of atonement. That's what's happening. This is not an innocent victim being harshly brutalized, nor is it a heroic act of courage. It is an act of atonement. And you could rightly say to me, but what a blinking flip does that mean? What's the heart of the onion? Tell me it's atonement. There's no atonement in the middle of an onion. Yes, there is. I'll show it to you. Atonement, right, is not a word we use very often, but it's a massive theme that we see in our stories that we love. In fact, one of the rare places where the word atonement gets used, or atoned, is like in a sports match, a football match. You know, some player makes a stupid mistake, and then later on he scores a goal, and the commentator says he's atoned for what he got wrong. So atonement means put things right. So here's what Jesus is doing on the cross. He is putting something right. He is doing something to make atonement. But what? What does that mean? Okay, in order to answer that, we need to face up to some pretty tough stuff. So let me warn you, this is going to be tough just for a few minutes. But I don't want to sugarcoat this. I want to tell you what the Bible says so you can decide for yourself and understand what it really means. We have a problem. As human beings, we have a big problem. Now, no one really likes being told that they've got a problem because we like to think we're okay. It's like, did you see the story the other day about the guy who got a phone call from the surgery to tell him to come and get his vaccine? But he was quite offended because he's only in his 20s. He was like, well, why are you asking me? I thought it was just for vulnerable people. And they said, well, you're morbidly obese. And he was like, oh no. And his mum apparently said, I've been telling you this for years. So he said, I don't understand. I mean, I'm a bit overweight, but I wouldn't have thought I was morbidly obese. They said, no, you have according to our records, you have a BMI of 28,000. He was like, what? This is unbelievable. Anyway, when they looked into what had happened, on his medical records, he is 6.2 centimeters tall. So they've got him down as 6.2 centimeters tall, weighing 12 stone. So they're like, you are morbidly obese. You need to get your vaccine. Just imagine this little 6.2 centimeter man coming in. Love that story. But when he heard he had a problem, he was offended by it. Okay, well, let's bring us back to something a little bit more serious. I want to face up tonight to the fact that we have a problem. And it's a problem that has two bits to it, so let me explain what it is. The problem is called sin. Sin is when I put myself at the center of my world. And that's a problem. And I guess some of us deny that. We say, that's not a problem, I'm a good person. Shut up, don't be so rude to me. Some people minimize it. Wow, it's not that bad, is it? Some people excuse it. Well, I've had a tough life and it's been hard and I, deserve a bit of me time. But the Bible just calls a spade and says, you have a problem, it's called sin. And sin is not the bad things that you do, it's a heart that says it's all about me. But to be honest, sin isn't actually your problem. You see, sin wouldn't be a problem except for the fact that there's a God in heaven. Do you know your biggest problem is God? He is a big, big problem. That might surprise you tonight. Because all week we've been trying to tell you that God is, God loves you, he's good, he's great. Actually, he's your biggest problem. And the reason that God is a problem is because God's response to sin is anger. He is angry at sin. I did warn you it was going to get a little bit heavy for a few moments. I don't know if it really ever crosses your mind that God might be angry. I guess if you may not even be sure there is a God, and if there is a God, you sort of think, well, surely, God, your job is to love, right? I mean, come on. You've got one job, God. If you're going to be useful for anything, it's got to be about love, surely. This is why when something goes wrong, there's a natural disaster, everyone goes, well, where was God? Why didn't God stop this? Why didn't God sort this out? Why didn't God fix it? Because God, if you are there, your job should at least be to make everything right for me. Okay, well, here's a verse in the Bible. Listen to this. This is Psalm 90. If only we knew the power of your anger. God is powerfully angry at sin. Now, the reason we find that hard is because we go, hang on, but I know about anger, and anger's bad. Okay, well, let me carefully define this anger for you. God is angry at sin because of what he is like. It flows out of his character. Look, stick with this. Genuinely, this is going to be important. This talk has got a really exciting end. You just need to hang in there for it, okay? I genuinely think it's an exciting end. I'm not just saying that. But you've got to go through this first. You've got to understand the problem first. God is angry at sin because of his character. So let me tell you what God is like. There's three things about God that make him angry at sin. Firstly, God is holy. Over and over again, the Bible says God is holy. Oh, great. It's not those Bible-y words, holy this, holy Bible, holy church, holy, holy, holy. What does that mean? Well, holy is a massive word. It's like an awesome word. Holy is a heavy word. Not like bubbles. It's heavy. The holiness of God means that God is awesome. He's majestic and he's magnificent and he's infinite and he's eternal and he's perfect and he's pure. He's not like me. I'm not holy. I'm limited and I'm weak and I'm small and I fail and I'm impure and I get things wrong, but not God. He's holy. I once took my, when one of my kids was 5 years old, I took him to a Thomas the Tank Engine thing. And it was great. And the Fat Controller was there. Although he's not called the fat controller anymore, for obvious reasons. That's not politically correct anymore. So Topham Hatt, I think he's called. But this bloke was a fat controller. And so there he was, great big bloke, really big bloke, big top hat. And my son, who's normally full of life and shouting and running around like crazy, this was his response to the fat controller. Right? He just stood there and he went, like that, just stood there in front of this guy. And he looked so small, and the fat controller looked so big. And in that moment, I thought, there's a picture. That's what God is like. He's massive, and he's awesome, and he's glorious, and he's beautiful. And a right response to God is to stand in awe of him because he's holy. If you could see God now, you would be terrified of him. We've shrunk God down to this little, purse in my pocket thing. God, here's my little God. And he's awesome. But of course, because God is holy, that means anything that is not holy, he cannot be in contact with because he is so pure. In order for something to be pure, impurity has to be kept out. If you're making pure orange juice, you have to make sure that all the yucky filth is kept away. And so if God is holy, that means all the yucky filth of this world must be kept away. That is why God is angry at sin, because it's yucky filth, and he is pure and holy. There's the first reason why God is angry at sin. And let me tell you, that is good news that God is holy, because it makes him beautiful. But he's not just holy, he's also righteous. He's not just awesomely beautiful, he's also right. Righteous means always right, only right, all the time. That is what righteousness is. My mum used to have a teacher at school, and if you did a good piece of work, then you'd get an A, standard. But if you did a really good piece of work, then you got an A plus. But if you did a really, really good piece of work, you got an A double plus. But if you did a really, really good piece of work, you got an A double plus star. But if this does have an end. Okay, I promise this is the last one. If you did a really, really good piece of work, you got an A double plus star excellent. That was the highest mark you could get, A double plus star. That was perfection. That was when you got everything right. This is what I mean when God is righteous. I mean that God is A double plus star excellent. I mean that God is righteous in everything he does. He never makes mistakes. He never says oops. He never messes up. He never forgets things. He never gets it wrong. But because God is righteous, that means he cannot tolerate what is not righteous. You see, what judge in a courtroom shrugs their shoulders at injustice? What judge says, you murdered? Don't worry, we all have bad days. I'm a lovely, lovely, lovely judge. I forgive you. You would be outraged. It would hit the national news and everyone would say that's a terrible judge. And so here it is. Here is God, the righteous judge, and he must punish. He must be angry at sin because I want him to be. When I see someone doing something evil, I want a God who will punish that. Not a God who will ignore it. But I don't really want him to punish me. And so here is the God who is holy, who is righteous. And you may say, well, this all just sounds like a very cold, mean, harsh, nasty God. Okay, well, here's the third thing about God that means he's angry at sin. And I'm driving this home, but you've got to see the heart of the onion. This is why atonement is necessary. Hang in there. God is holy, God is righteous, and God is loving. And let me tell you this, the reason that God is angry at sin is because he loves. You have to understand that anger is a function of love. It flows out of love. If someone walks up to one of my kids in the street and punches them in the face and I shrug my shoulders and go, never mind. You'd say, what kind of father are you? Don't you love your son? There is a right anger that flows out of love. And here's the deal. God made this world and he loves this world. He passionately loves this world. And therefore, when he sees sin smashing this world apart, he's angry. Lovingly angry. And so when I say that God is angry at sin, what I mean is that he has a holy anger, a righteous anger, a loving anger. That's your problem. That's my problem. I have done wrong, and God is angry. We think, oh, it's great. What a great talk. Thanks for coming. It's just terrific. This is miserable, isn't it? Okay, now you're ready to understand atonement. You see, this God who is angry at sin has done something incredible. He has found a way, provided a way to deal with sin, and the way of dealing with sin is called atonement. Atonement is dealing with God's anger at sin. And this is how it worked. Way back in the Old Testament, there was one day a year when atonement was made. It was a great day when the priest, the great high priest, would take an animal, actually 2 goats, and the sin of the people was confessed and was placed upon the goats. And one of the goats was sent away into the desert as a picture of the sin being taken away, dealing with the first bit of the problem, my sin. And the second goat was then slaughtered, and the blood was taken into the holy place, into God's presence, and atonement was made. You see, here is what my sin deserves. It deserves death. But here is a goat that dies in my place. And so now atonement has been made. That's what atonement is all about. But of course, how can an animal take away sin? How could that be right? How can that work? Well, it doesn't. It was all pointing forwards to the moment when the perfect one would come. And as Jesus died on the cross, this was the plan. It was a plan that God had to put things right. It was a plan that God had to make atonement. He says, I so love these people. I don't want to destroy them. I don't want to punish them. And so instead, he said, I will send my son. And Jesus comes as the perfect sacrifice. And as Jesus dies on the cross, my sin is placed upon him. And so the anger of God falls not on me, but it falls on him. Jesus is crushed. He dies so that I might live. And the beauty of this is that God doesn't ignore my sin. He punishes it. Why? Because he's righteous. And he has to punish sin because sin must be dealt with. He can't ignore it. So instead he says, I will punish it, but I will punish Jesus instead of you. But there's one really cool detail in John's gospel, which is, I think, is fascinating. And I hope this might even get you excited. Have a look with me at something a little bit weird. Pick up your books, and we're finishing with this, so hang in there. At the bottom of bottom of page 49, Jesus died. They take down his body. He said, "It's finished." Look at the verse 40 down near the bottom. It says this: taking Jesus' body, the two of them wrapped it with the spices in strips of linen This was in accordance with Jewish burial customs. At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. So here's his body, it's wrapped in linen. Now look at the heading of the next bit. Look what it says. Do you see what it says? The empty tomb. That little bit, the empty tomb, that's not part of the Bible. That was a heading that was added in by someone to help us find our way around. And it's wrong. The tomb wasn't empty. The tomb wasn't empty. Have a look, if you don't believe me. Let's go down to verse 3. So Peter and the other disciples started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along with him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. What is it with the linen? What is the fascination that John has with linen? It wasn't an empty tomb, there was a pile of linen. Okay, give me 2 minutes, and I will show you why that linen, that pile of linen, guarantees that you can be right with God. Do you remember the Day of Atonement that I told you about? Guess what the high priest wore when he went in to offer the sacrifice on the Day of Atonement? He took off his magnificent robes, and listen to this. I'll read it to you so you know I'm not making it up. The high priest is to put on the sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments next to his body. He's to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. These are the sacred garments he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on. He's wearing linen. The high priest, when he took the sacrifice into the holy place to make atonement, he was wearing linen. He goes into the temple, into the most holy place to make the sacrifice, to make atonement. And guess what he does when he's finished? I'll read it to you. Then Aaron is to go into the tent of meeting, take off the linen garments he put on before he entered the most holy place, and he is to leave them there. This is how it works. On the Day of Atonement, stick with this is big stuff, right? On the Day of Atonement, the high priest is to put on linen. Then he is to make atonement. That is, he is to offer the sacrifice that satisfies the anger of God, so that God's anger is turned away, so that the people can be restored to God's relationship. And when he's finished making the sacrifice, when the work is done, he leaves the linen behind and he comes out. And it's at that moment, as he comes out, that all the people watching outside go, we're right with God. The sacrifice has been accepted. You're standing outside, waiting, hoping the priest will come out. Because if he dies in there, you're in trouble, because it means the sacrifice has not been accepted, which means atonement has not been made, which means that God is still angry, which means you are heading for punishment, not for joy. But as soon as he walks out, you know the job is done. But remember, all of that was just pointing forward. That was just part of the plan, pointing forward to Jesus. Okay, here comes Jesus, now the perfect great high priest, who doesn't offer an animal, but offers himself. He gives himself his own body. And as he offers himself, he makes atonement. He takes the anger that I deserve so that I can be made right with God. He then goes into the tomb wrapped in linen. And 3 days later, he leaves the linen behind and he comes out to new life. And that means he's finished his work. That's the middle of the onion. The middle of the onion is that Jesus is the only one who is able to deal with God's anger at your sin. That's why he came. You don't have to make atonement. Can you imagine a little kid on the Day of Atonement, saying, "Oh, Mummy, shall I offer a hamster just to make sure?" No, don't worry, the priest has done it. It's nothing more for you to do. There's nothing more for you to do. All you have to do is to accept, to receive the gift of atonement. Jesus says to you tonight, I will make you right with God. I will restore your relationship with God. It may be that some people sitting here feel so guilty for things they've done in the past. You think God would never forgive me. Let me tell you this, yes, he will. And he'll forgive you because Jesus, the great high priest, has made atonement and left the linen behind. Jesus is raised from the dead. It's all been paid. You just have to accept it. It doesn't matter how much you've done. It doesn't matter how far you've run. It doesn't matter what you have done. It doesn't matter how bad you have been. Jesus has paid and made atonement so that you can be back in right relationship with God. Of course, it may be some of us, we're sitting here and we go, I don't need that. I'm not a bad person. Well, I guess my job is to warn you and to say, your sin really is serious. God really is angry. And if you don't receive atonement, then you will face God's punishment forever. It's that serious. That's why we put on weeks like this. I plead with you tonight. Jesus offers you perfect atonement. All you have to do is say yes. You say sorry for the way I've lived. Thank you for dying for me. Please give me atonement. You don't atone for yourself. You can't. Jesus does it for you. This is good news. I know that I'm right with God. I know that he loves me. I know there's no anger. And that's real freedom. That's the middle of the onion. I'm going to leave you to think about that. But if you've got questions, I'd love to talk to you more about it. I'll be standing outside with G&D's ice cream freezing. And I'd love to talk to you about it. To be honest, I will stay until midnight if you want to talk about this. Nothing matters more. The thought that someone in this room tonight might go home right with God. What could be better than that? Thanks for listening. I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you so much, John T. That was really powerful stuff. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us.
I never knew about the relevance of the linen.
So cool how much you can get from just like a sentence in the Bible. There's so much behind it. So, yeah, I love that.
Grace, after hearing that message, many people probably have questions. How can they find out more?
That's a great question. So Known isn't over. We'll be here tomorrow at lunchtime and in the evening, so do come along if you can. And even after this week is finished, Known doesn't end there. So it continues every Monday and some Tuesdays at an event that we like to call The Search. So I think we've got a little video that we can show you now. Going to be in a lot of gardens around Oxford with fire pits, free marshmallows, hot chocolate, cake, and a lot of, just an hour to chat about, big questions of life. And should be fun. So Jonathan will let you know how to get involved. But after next Monday, so from the 17th of May, we'll be back in Costa, literally around the corner on the top floor. So, that's what's going on.
If you want to stay updated about the search, it's super easy. Just text 88802, the word search. Text the word search to 88802. It should be up there.
Feel free to do that now as well.
That video mentions baby pigeons. I hadn't actually watched the video properly, I must admit, standing up here. I have never seen a baby pigeon.
I've never seen one, no.
You see pigeons all the time, but there are no baby pigeons.
I know.
Anyway, that's a stupid thought. But do get your phones out now. Text the word search to 88802. And whilst you do that, the search is going back to Costa, which means there's going to be cake, there's going to be biscuits, there's going to be scones. And me and Grace have actually had a little bit of a debate about this. Some people, it seems, have very strong opinions on, first of all, how it's pronounced. I say scone.
I say scone, I think.
And also this jam versus cream debate, which goes on first.
To be honest, I don't care. As long as you've got jam in there and cream in there somewhere.
I don't see how it could possibly work with the cream first. I don't see how that works. But I'm seeing shaking of head in the audience. So, you know what, we'll give it up to the people. If you're on the live stream, you can put it in the chat. If you're in the room, put your hand up now if you prefer to put the cream first and then jam. Oh, wow. And if you prefer to put the jam first?
50-50.
I have no idea who is. Do it again. If you're cream first, put your hand up. I'll try and count. Some people have bottled it and not put their hand up the second time. And if you prefer the jam first? I think it's jam.
Yeah, I think jam wins.
But there are some people who change their minds halfway
This is
through.
my thing, though. If you turn it upside down, it's the other one. So, like, it just doesn't really matter.
Why would you turn the scone upside down?
I don't know.
That's enough of us, clearly. The evening's coming to an end. Thanks so much for coming, guys.
Yeah.
Remember, there's G&Ds at the back. The stewards will direct you out. Thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
Esther, Jane, and John T will be outside. Have a chat with them if you would like.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.